Hello everybody, welcome to the first G4 Lab IB Biology video. In this video we'll be discussing the first three topics: hierarchy of organization, emergent properties, and the traditional classification of organisms. Let's start off with the hierarchy of organization. Now in biology, systems tend to have a lot of smaller parts that work together to form a bigger whole that is able to do bigger tasks. Now, at the lowest level of the hierarchy, we have atoms. Now, atoms are the smallest form of matter, and yet they are very important. They are able to form chemical elements, and every state of matter, like solid, liquid, and gas, and plasma, are all composed up of atoms. And atoms are made up of protons and neutrons and electrons, but I'm here to teach you biology, so we'll just keep it at they are atoms. Now, some examples of atoms, obviously we have like the carbon atom, we have the hydrogen atom, and basically every element on the periodic table are made up of atoms. Now, one level above atoms, we have simple molecules. Simple molecules are different atoms, basically, that are bonded together to form small, simple molecules. And I'm guessing at the IB biology level, you have already learned how chemical bonds work. But essentially, yes, simple molecules are bonded atoms. Now, for some specific examples of simple molecules, we have stuff like water, which is H2O. We have glucose, which is C6H12O6. Now, one level above simple molecules, we have even more molecules called macromolecules. Now, macromolecules, they are created when smaller molecules polymerize, which means they combine together, and they are able to form larger molecules, as the name suggests. And some examples of these macromolecules are stuff like proteins and phospholipids. Next, we have subcellular structures. Now, as the name suggests, subcellular structures are structures within a cell that are specialized to have specific functions within that cell, and it just helps it participate into the whole. So for example, we have the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus has a function that is able to modify and change polypeptides within the cell. We also have mitochondria, which you might know is the powerhouse of the cell, but mitochondria is able to produce energy, ATP, through cellular respiration. All of these smaller parts within the cell help the cell become the cell and survive and have its great functions. Now at the next level, we have cells. We will cover cells more deeply in a different video because they are a topic of their own, but what you need to know now is that cells are the smallest form that can carry out all processes of life. Now, some examples of cells, we have like the sperm cell, we have plant cells, we have neuron and bacteria. They are all different types of cells that have different functions. Next, we have tissues. Now, tissues, they're not like your ordinary tissues that you use to wipe off stuff. Tissues are instead a group of cells that work together and interact together to perform a similar function or a certain task. And tissues, the cells that make them up don't necessarily have to be the same kind of cell. I mean, they could be, but they don't have to be. And tissues are a vital part of making up the next level, which is organs. But for example, we have connective tissues, we have nervous tissues, and we have muscle tissues. All three of those tissues make up the organ of the skin. Of course, now we need to talk about the organs themselves. Now, organs, they, as I said before, are a group of different tissues that form a singular unit, one structure, in order to perform a common or similar task. And I'm sure you probably already know about organs a lot, but we have some examples. We have like the heart, we have the lung, we have stomachs, but there's also organs in plants, like the root, the stem, the leaf, and even the flower. One level higher than the organ, we have the organ system. Organ systems are formed when multiple organs work together and interact together in order to perform a common goal or a similar function. For example, we have the respiratory system. The respiratory system is made up of many organs working together. More specifically, we have the organ of the nose and we have lungs. This helps complete the system and, allows the organism to breathe. We also have the plant root system, where we have the organ of the leaf and the root working together to complete the system. Now this next level is the organism. This is probably the one you're most familiar with, considering that you are an organism yourself. Now, there are two different main types of organisms. We have the unicellular and the multicellular organism. Now, for unicellular organisms, as the name suggests, it is a single living organism that only has one cell. So, for example, we have like the paramecium, we have an amoeba, and we have bacteria. They're all living organisms, but they only have one cell. Now, for multicellular organisms, they obviously are the same thing, but they contain more than one cell. For example, we have like a deer as shown in this picture, and you yourself. You are an organism made up of many, many different cells. Now, something to know with organism is that an organism does not necessarily have the lower levels of organization within them. Obviously, humans have like the organ system and the organs like lungs, but unicellular organisms like paramecium, they don't have lungs, they don't have the space for that, so they don't necessarily have organs. Alright, one level above organisms, we have populations. Populations are made up of the same organism species that are present in the same area and time. For example, we have like a petri dish of bacteria. They are all of the same species, and they are all living in the same place at the same time. Another example, we have a group of the same penguin species. They could all be living in the same area at the same time, and they must all be the same species to count as a population. And then we have communities. Now, communities, they're essentially populations, but instead of being made up of the same species, they are made up of different populations, meaning they are made up of different species, but they still live in the same area at the same time. So, for example, we have bees and flowers in a meadow. They are completely different species, but they are in the same area, and they're existing in the same time. Now, the importance of communities is that they are very useful to study biodiversity. Next up, we have ecosystems. You've probably heard of these as well. Now, ecosystems, they are built up of both the biotics and abiotic factors in an area. To define those terms, biotic factors are to do with the life or the living materials made by organisms in an area. For example, we have plants like trees, and we have like animals like fish and tigers and monkeys. They are all biotic factors in an ecosystem. Now, abiotic factors, they are to do with the non-living and physical and chemical occurrences within the area. For example, we have like light, water, soil, and air. Above the ecosystems are biomes. Now, biomes, they are large geographic regions which have very similar abiotic factors to each other, and every single organism within a biome is adapted to its climate. Because of this, many similar ecosystems tend to make up one big biome. So examples of biomes, we have like the desert, we have grasslands, and we have the tundra. Lastly, at the top of the hierarchy sits the biosphere. It is the highest level on the hierarchy for IB biology, and more specifically, the biosphere is the regions of the planet where life exists below the atmosphere, where life can strive, exist, and persist. There are many factors affecting where a biosphere could be. For example, we have temperature and we have radiation. Those are two very important factors to life and can definitely manipulate where a biosphere is. And obviously, an example of a biosphere would be many regions on the Earth. Now let's go on to our second topic, which are emergent properties. Now, emergent properties are a property that only comes about when multiple parts begin to work together. So for example, think of like a car. For a car, you need the wheels, the doors, and gas to work together. Those on their own cannot be a car and do functions like a car would, but together they come about to be able to make a car that's able to move and transport. Now, when it comes to emergent properties, most of them are impossible to predict just from the lower levels of organization, which is the parts. Now let's take our first example of H2O, water. We know that this molecule is liquid at room temperature, but we also know that it is made up of the atoms of the hydrogen atom and the oxygen atom. Now, both of these atoms are obviously at a lower level of organization than the molecule. However, both of these atoms are actually gas at room temperature, meaning if we only had this lower level of organization, we wouldn't be able to predict that, the combination of the two atoms and the molecule forms, we wouldn't be able to predict that it would be liquid at room temperature. Another example we have is being a predator. Being a predator is an emergent property, and it can't just come from an organ like a digestive system. It has to be at the organism level to be a predator. Another emergent property is consciousness, which is defined to be a state of being awake and aware. Now, there is a lot of debate on where it comes from, but we all know that the neuron cell is incapable of conscious thought, so it is believed to be that the emergent property of consciousness comes from the organ of the brain. Now let's move on to our third topic, which is traditional classification. Now, one term that you would need to know here is taxonomy. Now, taxonomy is the study of classifying organisms based on their shared characteristics with one another. One concept that goes along with this belief is the morphological species concept, which states that the species are a group of organisms that are very distinct from every other organism because of their unique features and characteristics. Now, when it comes to traditional classification, there are 9 different levels, from domain being the most broad to subspecies being the most specific. Now, the order goes in domain to kingdom to phylum to class, order, family, genus, species, and then to subspecies. Now, obviously, within all of them, the domain is bound to have the most amount of organisms under them. Now, there are 3 main types of domains. There's archaea, there's eukarya, and then there's bacteria. Those are the 3 big domains for organisms to be under. But when it comes to subspecies, there are probably thousands of them out there. There are 3 big benefits when it comes to the system as well. Biological information can easily be shared because organisms within the same group or close to each other are bound to have similar characteristics because that's how they are separated in the first place. It also allows characteristics to be predicted if an organism is in the same known group, because if they're in the same group, they're bound to have similar characteristics. Now, species of the same group most likely share a common ancestor as well, meaning it allows scientists to be able to study evolution easily among a species. Now let's get into the naming of a species, known as binomial nomenclature. Now, the main rule for this is you go with the genus name and then the species name. But don't forget these 3 simple rules. First of all, you must uppercase the first letter of the genus, and then lowercase the first letter for the species. The second rule is to make sure to write the name in italics. Or, if you're on paper, writing in an underline should be a lot easier. And the third rule, after you state the entire genus plus species name fully, you can abbreviate the genus into 1 letter. Let's take, for example, the emperor penguin. Their genus is called the Aptenodytes, and their species are the Forsteri. Using the rules that we just learned, their scientific name would be called the Aptenodytes forsteri. Now don't forget, even though you have combined the 2, you have to capitalize the first letter of the genus and keep the lowercase in the species, and make sure the entire thing is in italics. If you have already used this somewhere already, you can just call it the A forsteri. Let's get into the benefits of this system now. First of all, it can track evolutionary relationships. All members of the same genus share a common ancestor. Hence, all the species under the same genus must have some sort of evolution acting upon them from the common ancestor. Second of all, scientists are able to communicate worldwide without a language barrier using this naming system. They're not necessarily in any specific language, and they're easily able to just spread them across the world without having to worry about any localizations or any changes in language because they're just the scientific names that are accepted worldwide. Now let's have you try a problem. This is the painted lady butterfly. Its genus is Vanessa, and its species name is the Cardui. Can you try to find the scientific name for this organism? I'll give you a minute to think about it, or just pause the video. But obviously, the answer to this question is the Vanessa Cardui. But make sure the V is capitalized, the C is in lowercase, and everything should be italicized. That is it for the first IB Biology G4 Lab video, and I hope you learned something from the 3 topics that we have covered today. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below and I will try to respond to them. And for the next video, for IB Biology, we will be covering the processes of life, cell theory, viruses, and common structures. Please check out our IB Computer Science and Physics videos that we have posted as well. Thank you.